cysteine is one of the 20 amino acids that are found in the human body that make up a protein. Now, there's a couple different things about cysteine compared to every other amino acid, but let's start with the overall structure of cysteine. Now, all amino acids are the L form of the amino acid, so any amino acid you see is going to be in the L orientation. And the L is really just how it looks in relationship to glyceraldehyde, if it looks like the D or the L of the glyceraldehyde. And so for every single amino acid, they all look like the L form of glyceraldehyde, so they're all called L whatever. So this is L-cysteine. The awkward thing comes in when L has nothing to do with R versus S orientation, because that actually is talking about like the absolute configuration of the alpha carbon or the chiral carbon. So if you got any amino acid, you've got this alpha chiral center carbon, and this is the one that is a stereocenter. There's 4 different attachments. One of them, carboxylic acid, one of them, amine group, one of them, straight hydrogen, and then the other one's always the R group. Now, as it relates to cysteine, it's the one molecule that's not like any of the rest of them. So if we go back and talk about absolute orientation around this alpha carbon, let's look at the 4 things that are directly attached to the carbon. First up, we've got nitrogen. Then we've got a carbon here, and also a hydrogen here. Hydrogen is always going to be last. It has nothing to do with anything else. And so if we're comparing nitrogen to carbon, nitrogen has a higher priority. So we're going to give this group right here, this is number 1 priority group. Now if we go back to this carbon, we said both of these are carbon, so that doesn't matter much. So we have to go to what's after that. So here we've got a sulfur group, and on this one we've got an oxygen and then another oxygen. Now these oxygens are a lower priority than this sulfur group, and so this sulfur group will take number 2. So it's going to go 1, 2, 3, and that is going to be the R configuration. And this is the only amino acid that is L, but also R. Everything else is L and S. This is the only one that has an R orientation, and it's because sulfur has a higher priority than oxygen. This is the only molecule that's like this. So knowing cysteine is R-cysteine found in the human body, but it is also still L-cysteine. And if you know this orientation, you can always figure out if it's going to be an R versus S orientation. Cysteine, R, and L. Once we know the overall structure of this amino acid, we have to ask ourselves, when are they going to be able to lose their hydrogens? And when they lose their hydrogens, are they able to make any other hydrogen bonding? At all times, always, carboxylic acid is going to be the first thing that's losing a hydrogen. And so at a pH around 2 something, the hydrogen that was on this COO, that hydrogen is going to be gone. And now this is just going to be negatively charged. The pH of 2 something is way below what your body's pH is, which is around 7.4. So the way that it's going to look, you're never going to see COOH in the human body. It's always going to be COO minus, because this is losing the hydrogen at a very low pH. Then if we keep going, this amine group is not going to lose any one of these hydrogens until at least a pH of 9 something. And so because the pH of 9 something is way higher than what your body's pH is, at all points in time in the human body, this nitrogen is going to have an extra attachment. And so it's going to be +1. And this carbon, these oxygens attached to this carbon, one of these is going to have a -1 charge. So you're going to have a -1 and a +1 on the same molecule. They balance each other out to 0, but the overall molecule is not actually 0. This is called a zwitterion, and this zwitterionic form is the form that you're always going to see in the human body. But the thing that matters the most about these is this R group. And as it relates to cysteine, what really matters is this sulfur. Now you'll see this pink and this purple thing. These are the extra electrons that sulfur has that aren't bound to something that are able to do other activities in other places. Sulfur is a pretty electronegative element, especially in comparison to this hydrogen or this carbon. And so because this is going to want to have these electrons more than the carbon or the hydrogen, this is going to have an unequal sharing of electrons, aka a polar bond. And because these bonds are polar, it's also going to be able to take advantage of the moments when one's more positive and one's more negative to be able to bind to other oxygens and hydrogens and do hydrogen bonding. So because it can do hydrogen bonding, this is considered hydrophilic. The other thing that's really, really, really important about sulfur, specifically within cysteine, is that this sulfur, because of these, it's able to do something called a disulfide bridge, where it can bind to another cysteine molecule, and you have this sulfur binding to another sulfur. When these disulfide bridges are made, the only amino acid that is able to do disulfide bridging in a protein is cysteine. And in order to break a disulfide bridge, that disulfide bridge was able to be made because one of those lone pairs of electrons is now just shared with another sulfur. And so now we have this disulfide bridge here. But if you want to break the disulfide bridge, like for example, if you're trying to denature the protein or get rid of its secondary, tertiary, or quaternary structure, you got to get rid of these disulfide bridges. The easiest way to do that is to add back in electrons, aka reduce. Add electrons in, so now it breaks this up. One of the most common ways that these disulfide bridges get reduced and broken is by something called sodium dodecyl sulfate or sodium lauryl sulfate or SDS. So if you're ever doing a gel, and you could do it with SDS page or without SDS page, if you're trying to get rid of these disulfide bridges, you need to add SDS to reduce it, or something else that's able to reduce. But the most common thing that they use in experiments to reduce these proteins is SDS. The reason you're using SDS is to add electrons back to the sulfur to get rid of the disulfide bridge.